So I've missed bits and pieces, so I'm not sure if it's been mentioned so far that this is Transfiguration Sunday today. One of those ones that's like, we don't make a huge fuss of it, but it is a thing. And it's the day that we remember, Jesus, he meets with Moses and Elijah on top of a mountain. It's very exciting, everything lights up, clouds come down, God speaks. And then basically they all just go back down the mountain and carry on like nothing happened, which I always found quite intriguing. It's like the disciples going, yeah, what did you do Tuesday? Oh, well, radiant glory of God, met Moses and Elijah. Then we went out and got fish. I don't know what they do for takeaway back then. But it's not this dramatic turning point in the narrative. It doesn't seem to reveal anything new to the disciples, although they were not always the most perceptive group of people. It just happened. And maybe it is that, if you're a person who follows Jesus around on a daily basis, that you just get so used to things being amazing and incredible that, just bumping into two of the most important characters in the whole of the Old Testament is just another day. And that's generally why we think that it is Moses and Elijah that Jesus meets with, because they are kind of representative of the whole of the Old Testament. Moses represents the law. Elijah is the prophets. I so desperately want to say, and together they are wild stallions, but I feel that's a joke that only about 3 people in the room are going to get. So I'm avoiding that, and just saying that together Moses and Elijah are the entirety of Scripture. They represent the whole of the Old Testament between them. But I don't think that's the only reason, or at least it's not the only connection that Moses has to the top of the mountain. And the connection that he has, bizarrely, is the top of another mountain. We heard the reading a moment ago. Because back in Exodus, there's this point where Moses receives the 10 Commandments. In fact, we sometimes forget he receives the 10 Commandments twice. Because the first time he comes down the mountain and sees the golden calf and smashes the tablets and has to go back and get another set of tablets of the 10 Commandments. But he gets them from God in person. He meets personally with God. And this is really not something that happens in the Old Testament. Not many people get to meet with God. Isaiah at one point is in heaven, and he is so surprised by this that he essentially assumes that he's going to die. He has met with God, God is holy, and Elijah is like, I'm going to die now. And he doesn't, but that's his understanding, that's his expectation. John, when he has his revelation, has something similar. He thinks that he is going to die just for being in the presence of God in a vision. Not many people get to do it for real. Elijah, the other person on the mountain, he comes quite close. He does meet with God in person, but hides his face in his cloak. God passes as a storm and a wind and all that kind of stuff, and then appears as a still, quiet voice. And Elijah hides his face in his cloak and doesn't see God. But Moses does. And after meeting with God, his face becomes radiant. So much so that other people are scared of him. And Moses has to cover his face with a veil whenever he's not in God's presence. He takes it off when he's with God, he puts it on when he's not. And there are Jewish traditions that suggest that this remains the case for the rest of his life. Another 40 years of having a face that shines like a spotlight. In fact, some traditions say even after he's dead, it carries on. I'm not sure how. But Moses' face shines because he meets God. And this is what Paul picks up on in his letter to the Corinthians, which is the other reading that we had. And in chapter 3, just before the bit that we heard, Paul is setting up this kind of extended metaphor. He starts by saying that the Corinthian church is like a letter of recommendation. It's his reference. He doesn't need an actual reference because he just points people at the Corinthian church and says, there, that is what I have done. But he says, it's written on hearts. It's a reference written on hearts instead of on stone. And then the stone becomes a symbol itself, and that becomes symbolic of the letter of the law, contrasted with the Spirit. And Paul has this interesting relationship with the law. As an ex-Pharisee who's now a Christian, he has this interesting relationship where in verse 7 he refers to the law as death. The law is death. And then later, also in verse 7, he says the law is glorious. Paul has a mixed relationship with the law. The law is so glorious that giving it on tablets of stone left such an impression on Moses' face that people could no longer look at him. The law is incredible. It is glorious. And yet, says Paul, it is still less glorious than the Spirit. There is greater glory in the Spirit. And that's basically what brings us up to where we actually heard today. It brings us up to the reading. And also, I'm going to throw in today's top tip, which is whenever, particularly Paul, but any Bible writer starts a reading with therefore, or since, or in that way, it's always worth going back about 2 paragraphs to find out what they are thereforeing about. It actually transforms what you're reading, because suddenly you're like, oh, this is in contrast to, or this is off the back of. I highly recommend it, if anything starts with a therefore. And so, finally, this brings us up to Moses' veil. He meets with God, his face is radiant, people are afraid of him, and his solution is to hide his face with a veil, to hide the glory of God. He only reveals the glory of God to God when he meets with him. Otherwise, it's hidden. And Paul's view is that this continues long after Moses himself is gone. Not just in it carried on in Moses' death, but in a more broad sense, that we continue to veil ourselves, not in a practical sense, but in a spiritual sense. And he paints the veil no longer as a covering of the face, but a covering of the heart. It prevents a clear understanding of God. He says something similar elsewhere, where he talks about we see through a mirror darkly. We don't yet have a full understanding. Here he's using the metaphor of the veil, hiding what's going on. Those who are veiled, those who follow the path of Moses, cannot grasp the glory of God because they cannot see it for themselves, because there's something in the way. And then Paul contrasts that with those who follow Jesus, because they are not veiled. In the Spirit, there is freedom. And part of that freedom is the ability to contemplate God, and in doing so, to become more like him. See, for Paul, the glory of God is not a passive thing. It's not like this giant theatrical spotlight. You know, imagine if there was a spotlight right up on the back of the gallery, and it was pointing at me, and I'd be there in the light, and you'll be going, oh, look at that lovely light. It's amazing. But that would be it. It would just be like a passive light falling on me. It would illuminate me, but it wouldn't do anything else. It would just be light. But God's glory is more than that. This is not just about a light shining out of Moses' face, or a light shining from God and falling on us. This is an outpouring. This is a transformation. The glory of God is transformative. As we gaze on God's glory, we are made more like him. And just consider that for a moment. Elijah, who is one of my Bible heroes, I love Elijah, the whole thing on the top of Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal and the exploding altars and the lightning and I love that story. It's the first thing I ever preached on. Elijah is amazing. He is awesome. He is, in many ways, the prophet. He is the guy that embodies the books of prophecy. He's one of the most important characters in the Old Testament. He's one of only 2 people that get to meet with Jesus on a mountaintop on the day of Transfiguration. Elijah doesn't get to look on the glory of God. When he meets God on a mountaintop, he covers his face with his cloak. But we, and even on my good days, I'd be very arrogant to compare myself to Elijah. We get to look at God's glory. Not like a glance, not like, with the kids where you're like, it's not that. It's not like a through your fingers behind the sofa glance at the glory of God. We get to contemplate it. We get to bask thoughtfully in the glory of God. To encounter God. To encounter his radiance and his presence. I think that's quite cool. The thing is, there is a catch. I think some of us are still Moses. See, Moses was the Old Testament exception to the rule. He is the one guy who does, in the Old Testament, get to see the glory of God to the point where his face lights up. And he hides it. Rather than shining with the glory of God, he chooses to conceal, to throw a veil over his face. In his personal and private moments with God, when he goes into that particular tent and encounters God, then the veil comes off. But the rest of the time, the veil is on, the glory is hidden. If he's going out amongst the people, the veil is on, the glory is hidden. Day-to-day life, veil on, glory hidden. I think some of us are still Moses. And I get why we do it. Well, actually, I say we. I get why I do it. And so I'm going to extrapolate and assume this probably overlaps with some of you. So please take as much out of this as you think is relevant to you. But I think we or I do it because sometimes it feels like a good idea. Like sometimes it just feels sensible not to go full throttle, guns blazing evangelical. Not everybody wants to be prayed for all of the time. Not everybody wants to talk about the Bible all of the time. Not everybody really wants to look at our honk if you love Jesus bumper sticker all of the time. And so maybe it's tactful. Maybe I'm being tactful and sensible to hold back a little bit. That's why I do it. Or maybe it's because we're afraid. Maybe we're afraid of being mocked or singled out or made fun of. Because really nobody wants to be known as like the religious nutter. Nobody wants to be known as the idiot who believes in the invisible old bearded man in the sky who sits on clouds because they don't understand science and logic. Because if you're a Christian, you definitely don't understand science. And so rather than get mocked, we stay quiet. Or maybe it's because once we did put it all out on the line and we prayed for someone and we gather around everyone, I'm going to pray for this person, I'm going to heal their broken leg, and then you prayed for them and then nothing happened. And the person that you prayed for was like, thanks for trying. And everyone else sort of went, I knew it wasn't going to work, and so I'll just wander off. And you thought, I am never doing that again. Or whatever. There could be other reasons that I've not thought of or not come across, but you go, actually, it was this. This is why sometimes I decide to just pull the veil over God's glory. We hide our face from the people. And it's not in the end because, in Moses' case, they were afraid of him. I worry that often for us it's because we have become afraid of them. and afraid of how they will respond to what we do and what we say and what we believe. And so this morning, I want to challenge us to be more than that. As my friends at Swim say, to live for more. To say, I am no longer going to hide the glory of God that shines in my life. In one of John's letters, 1 John 4, verse 18, we can read that there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. And that's the thing right there, isn't it? Because the more we love, the closer we get to perfect love, the less we fear. If perfect love casts out fear, then the more we love, the less we can fear. And so can we resolve to love the people that we meet? To say, whenever I meet anyone, I am going to act in their best interests, even at the cost of my own. I'm going to risk looking like an absolute numpty because maybe this person might receive the healing that I pray for, and that's what they need. And even if it costs me, that's what I'm going to do. Can we do that? On our own? Maybe not. But then we need to remember that we are never really on our own. Because we are with the Spirit. And as Paul said, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. We are free to remove the veil. Free to let the glory of God shine out in our lives. Now, am I saying we should all rush out, find a King James Bible, find a street corner, stand on it, start proclaiming the gospel? No. Well, I mean, maybe. If God speaks to you clearly, calls that and says this is what you should do, then that's what you should do. Probably he isn't going to call most of us to that. What I'm saying is we need to be more like Jesus. Because Jesus' approach is incredibly, ridiculously simple. Go places, act with mercy, speak the truth, love unconditionally. It's pretty much what Jesus does. Everything Jesus does is him going places, showing mercy, forgiving people, speaking truthfully, acting with unconditional, incredible love. That's the gospel. He doesn't really ever preach. I mean, he does. He's not averse to preaching, but it's not what he spends most of his time doing. He often goes out for meals with people that everyone else thought he probably shouldn't. He doesn't turn away anyone who wants his help. He just loves. And even at the moment of his death, he finds the time and the breath to forgive his executioners. Because with Jesus, there is no veil. There is no hiding who he is. There is just the glory of God. Even in his darkest moments, the glory of God. And so may we find the way to imitate the simplicity of Jesus. Paul takes this on. He takes his thought on into chapter 4. And if you get a chance to have a look at it later, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, I recommend it. It's a good read. And he continues this thought on what it means. So don't just leave it here, but go further with it. But to finish, we're going to go to the last words of the passage that we read today, where Paul says this. By setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. Let's not pretend to be something that we're not. Let's not hide away. Let's not veil the person that God has created us to be. Instead, let the glory of God shine on you and in you and through you, so that the world might see him in each one of us and come to see his glory for themselves. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that we don't have to be veiled. We don't have to hide from you, but that we can see your glory, that you share it with us, and that as we look upon you, Lord, I thank you that you transform us, that you draw us closer, and that you make us more like you. Lord, I ask that as we go out of here today, that you go with us, that you encourage us, that you give us the confidence not to hide away, not to conceal our faith and our love, but instead to let it shine forth, just as you did and as you do. Lord, shine your glory upon each one of us, so that we might shine it upon everyone else. Amen.